Thank you for joining us for another discussion about maladaptive daydreaming. And I have with me here Glen San Juan, who is a hypnotist who works on such things as maladaptive daydreaming. Thank God we have resources finally, and such things as anxiety and weight loss.
Hey everybody, I'm with the wonderful Nicole Vetter, and she is a former maladaptive daydreamer and now content creator. It's always great talking to you, Nicole.
Right? I love these little conversations we've been having. It's wonderful to, be able to actually talk about these things.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, it's funny. I've been posting a lot about all these loneliness feelings that have been coming up for me. And I'm like, oh my God, my
hmm
community must be just like, why are you bringing us down? But I think this is so important to talk about, right? And so today's focus is going to be the cycle of loneliness that maladaptive daydreamers go through, right?
hmm
Which makes complete sense because we are so attached to the paracosm and everything that it gives us as our coping mechanism. But then when it comes to like trying to live in the real world, things get really, really tricky.
Sure.
Um, and so I think the first thing really is that we spend so much time daydreaming that when it comes to actually going out in the real world and trying to create the life you want, your IRL life,
hmm
right? Um, it's like sometimes you feel like you're missing these skills. I think for me, right before COVID, I felt like my social skills were like at a really good point and I was really, really happy with it. And then COVID hit and I was like not interacting with people, not doing anything. I was literally outside running, playing. And
Sure.
then we're getting back into the real world. And I'm like, I forgot how to socialize. And I just had so much social anxiety.
hmm
I think specifically with maladaptive daydreaming, we're not practicing it as much as other people are, right? And then because it's a coping mechanism for trauma and loneliness, we might have just not had that experience as we were younger, as we were growing up, and then now we're stuck here. Have you had any of your
Sure.
clients talk about these things?
Sure. And I mean, a big thing of it is you think that it's not as lonely. I mean, at first it doesn't seem like you're as lonely because your mind's busy. I mean, you're thinking about it. I think you're thinking about the interactions that you have with other individuals. But once you step out of it, then that's when the reality hits. And then it becomes almost like a negative feedback loop. Shoot, I am really actually lonely. And it takes you back into your head. And you're thinking
Yeah.
about all these interactions that you want to have or you could be having. Come out of it again. Oh, I'm still really lonely. This is even worse. And it becomes like a downward spiral
Right.
that gets even worse for people. And that's when a lot of individuals realize that maybe I should go looking for help. Maybe
Right.
this is turning out to be more than just staying in my head, playing whatever scenarios are going on or what I ideally would like to say to other people, but I'm not actually talking to anybody.
Right.
And I know you kind of touched on that too about how it's, and I think we've talked about this previously about how just having those interactions in your head, as real as they really aren't, and it hurts you
Right.
socially.
Yes, right. Because this is the thing I realized is actually a therapist pointed this out to me is all these interactions that I'm having with my paracosm,
hmm
I am controlling all of it. I control the response I get back. I control everything that happens, right? So
Yep.
it's not a so it's not a real reaction, not a real response. So then when I go out in the real world and I'm dating and I'm interacting with people, sometimes
hmm
you're kind of shocked and it's kind of disappointing to
Sure.
see like when you're creating the response, it's positive. It goes the way that you want it. But
Right.
then you're actually in the real world and it doesn't go the way you want. And it can be really disappointing. And then like you don't want to try again, right?
Sure.
But I think the other thing for me, connecting back to that not having those skills is
hmm
for me as a child, anytime I tried to, use my words, be my authentic self, I always got shut down, right?
Sure.
Because I was raised by narcissists. So it's, now to me, being vulnerable, someone being open, and trying to communicate and use my words, it's so scary, right? And it's been 20 years of programming for me, right? Of
Yeah.
like how to live my life. And so now I want to go do the things, but it's scary. And I know that'd be so much easier and with my paracosm because I would get the response automatically, right? I'm not
Sure.
gonna be vulnerable and someone in front of me is not gonna like I won't be like I know I'll be heard. I know I'm not gonna get a bad response. But if I start dating someone and I try to use my words, I might get a bad response.
hmm
It'd be really difficult.
Yeah. And I love how you mentioned about how how disappointing it is when you're talking to other people. I feel like something I've noticed that I think there's a lot of that negativity bias that you have. I mean, when you have a social interaction with somebody, a lot of times there are a lot of good things that come out of it. Oh, that person does have a great idea. But with that negativity bias, you start focusing, oh shoot, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Or maybe they did one little like movement with their eyes that made me like I start dwelling on. And that's when it starts to eat at people, and then they start to move inward, start having that anxiety about themselves and what the other people think. And I think that's what part of contributes to people going into that downward spiral, that just that negative feedback loop that just keeps people there, that
Mhm.
becomes hard to break. And
Right.
so they're stuck
Especially
there for
since
years.
our brains our brains are kind of made for negativity, right? And it's
Yep.
not really negativity, but it's like, imagine, you know, way back when, most of our lives that we've been, hunter gatherers,
Hmm.
it's always survival, right?
Yep.
But it's like when you are having that interaction in real life, finally for the first time, and then like that one thing goes wrong, you're more likely to pay attention to that than like, oh, like it actually really went fine, right?
Exactly.
Uh,
I had a I had a similar I guess the one that I learned about was like if let's say pretend you're like a caveman, cave woman, and you're running from like a saber-toothed tiger.
right.
And even though you haven't eaten for 3 days, you run past a tree that's got like the most delicious apple that's on there. Which one are you going to pay attention to? The
Right.
apple that you
Yes.
probably want, or the immediate danger that you have? And so
Exactly.
there's that survival that goes in there that you want to try to stay alive, but
Right.
you at the same time you're focusing on that negative.
Mhm.
And I feel that even can contribute to today, that there is a lot of that negativity that we're trying to avoid, even though we may not be chased by lions or saber-tooth tigers anymore. There's still that instinct to do something about what we think is a big deal in our mind.
Yeah, totally. We see it all the time, right? Like
Hmm.
online dating. A lot of times I hear it's a numbers game, right? Which means there's a lot of times where you're going to interact with someone and it's not going to go well, but
Sure,
you're interacting with all these people to get to that one person that it's going to go well, right? You are going to
sure.
match, are going to have a good interaction. It's going to be a good date.
Yeah.
Um, But back to maladaptive daydreaming, right?
Hmm.
I think sometimes it's scary to even try to reach out at all and
Sure,
just be like, hey, I'm going to try this, right?
sure.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where I think I mean, back to what I said earlier about how it's usually it doesn't happen after one day. It's usually like a culmination of enough events to where you're finally put in the spot where you realize I
Mhm.
should probably reach out for help,
Right.
or I should probably talk to somebody else about that, even though they may not understand like what's going on. Fortunately, there are resources now. There are more people that are doing studies on it, which I think is a beautiful thing.
Right. Yeah, and going back to people not understanding. I mean, like all this loneliness, I feel like it's just so in my face lately, right? And of course, goes back to that negative. Like that negative
Sure.
is the thing that's going to be there, right? And I see it everywhere now at work with like my friends, and it's just like anytime I come up, it's just my brain is just in that like horrible mindset, and I'm like, all right, how do I get out of this? But
Yeah.
I finally was like, okay, I do need to talk about this more, even if it's horrible and even if it's scary. And I'm talking
Hmm.
to my boss, and I'm like, I've really been struggling. I feel super lonely. And she heard it as I moved to a new state. And like, it's hard, but
Yeah.
I didn't have enough time to be like, no, listen, I'm not lonely because I moved to a new state. Like I've made connections here, valuable connections
Yeah.
that I love. I've made a really good friend. I have a couple of friends, and I love being here. I'm not lonely because I moved to another state. I'm lonely because really I gave up maladaptive daydreaming, which is what let me kind of cope with that loneliness,
Sure.
right? But even under that, why am I lonely? I'm lonely because I didn't have that same bonding with my mom that certain people, a lot of people have, right?
Sure.
And I feel like that loneliness is just like it's there, and I've never really dealt with it until just now. Yeah, and it's how do you explain that to someone, right? Like I don't even know what to say to my boss to be like, no, you don't understand, right?
Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
it's something that I think there's a lot of people. It's not because I mean that's why it's discounted so much in society. You don't. I mean that's part of the reason why maladaptive daydreaming isn't like on the DSM, because people like just cast it off as like, oh, they're just in their head all the time.
Yeah.
But I mean, it really does lead to problems, and it does translate to how you view yourself at work, personally, with your family, and even the people that, as you said, you've made some close connections, but you still have those feelings.
Right.
And so I think that's why it's wonderful that we're talking about it now, that there are other people that have the same issue,
Right.
and it's worth connecting over so we can
Absolutely.
all get over that hump.
Yeah. I think, creating that community and making people feel heard, like, oh my
Mhm,
God, somebody actually understands what I'm going through, makes it
mhm.
a lot easier to be like, okay, I can take that next step, whatever that step is, right? For everybody, it's gonna be different. Everyone's journey is completely different.
Yep. I think that for people who do feel lonely, it is a big step to reach out.
Yeah.
But there's definitely resources out there. There's Facebook groups out there. There's people on Instagram. You can even see people on TikTok that there is a lot of people that can relate to the same thing. And I think we're pretty lucky to be living in this day and age that we have those opportunities.
Right.
And things are getting done. People are making YouTube videos, podcasts where you don't have to be alone.
Right.
And there is help out there. And you can move forward in your life, not just feel stuck, but
Right.
actually going for something that's valuable to you.
Right. And I think, for me, I don't know what I expected as I started making content, but now that like I'm here and people are like responding and commenting, and I'm like, oh my God, there's other people going through like what I've gone through, what I'm going through. And there is that like sense of community for me. And I want to continue to build that and nurture it because I think it's so powerful, right? For us to be like, oh my God, that person actually gets it, right?
Yeah,
There might not be anyone in our lives that does get it, right? Like I might
right.
find someone to date and they might never truly understand what I'm talking about, what I'm dealing with. And that's
Sure.
fine, right? Like your partner doesn't have to be your everything, but just having those people in your lives that do get it, it's like very powerful. Cause I think, one of the
Mhm.
things I said before is this is the first time I'm talking about maladaptive daydreaming. Like I have a friend who I've known for over 20 years. And he's like, I never knew this. And I'm like, I know, because I've never talked about it. Why would I talk about it? It was
Sure.
horrifying to me to even say it because I was so scared and so ashamed of it because I didn't have a name and I knew nobody else who had it, and now all of a sudden there's thousands of people who are like, yeah, me too. I'm like,
Sure.
whoa,
And
whoa.
it was a normalized thing too in their head that, people wouldn't normally, associate with any other thing other than, oh, well, maybe they're schizophrenic or something like that.
Right.
When really it's really
Right. So
being
a
stuck in
lot of
your
times
head.
we fear things that we don't understand. So we make it into this bigger thing. And it's like, hold on a second. No, like I'm not, there's nothing wrong with me. But this is just the way that my brain has been coping with something that really hurt me,
Right.
you know? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where that loneliness of, not having anyone to relate to. Well, now we do have the World Wide Web that we can connect with others. I
Right.
mean, as you mentioned, not just like who do you know immediately that's like at your work group or something, but I mean, like how
Just
we
not
found each
alone.
other. I mean,
Right.
you're over on the East Coast and I'm here in the middle of the country. So I mean, it's amazing who you find along the way and the
Exactly.
connections you can build.
I wouldn't be surprised if other, maladaptive daydreamers are really scared about being vulnerable and talking to people about like, hey, this is the experience I have. Like, this is the life I live. But also just being vulnerable and coming up and being like, hey, like I want to be friends with someone or I want to date someone and showing up and being like, okay, this is who I am. That's scary. I think that's scary overall. But it's
Sure.
even scarier when you're just, you're super used to being in your paracosm and
Hmm.
this bubble that you've always been in.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden you're like, I'm gonna pop this bubble and I'm gonna go see what's outside of it. It's like, oh my God, no, that's a lot. That's
Sure.
horrifying, right?
That fear of being judged, like it's a big thing. It's a big scary thing. And that's what keep a lot of people lonely too, because they're afraid of what other people think of them and what they might think of themselves. Because one of those things where a lot of people say, we're our own we're our own worst enemy,
Yes. And I think it's really interesting for me because I feel like I'm very vocal and loud and like it's strange to find myself like dating someone and then just be like, why am I so scared to say like the simplest thing? I'm petrified, right?
Sure.
And it's like just such a shock that I'm like I feel like I'm that friend in like the friend group that's like, hey, let's go ask if we can do this crazy thing. People are like, no, 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 don't ask. It's like they're gonna say no. And it's like, okay, well, they can say no, I'm gonna ask. But I'm so scared to ask for my needs to be met in a relationship because I mean, truly what it is I'm just so used to being told no to anything
Sure.
that I ask for that it's like in my familiar relationships that it's like I'm just too scared to ask. And it's so weird to me, right? But it's also
Sure.
like I am used to being in this bubble where I didn't have to ask because I conveniently made my paracosm do everything to
Hmm.
make my life easier, right?
Sure.
All my needs met. And I think also like my loneliness was, resolved by my interactions with my paracosm. They're not real, right? Like, let's be honest, they're not real. They don't exist except for in my head. But there was so much there that relieved those feelings. There was like that connection that I had created that fulfilled those needs for me. And I pretty much just gave that up like 10 months ago,
Yeah.
and here I am now kind of stewing in those emotions. And I feel like it's been interesting because I'm like, I keep being like, what do I do now? Like, do I, right? Because I think automatically we want to like disregard it, push it away, do anything we can to not deal with it. Like, how can I distract myself? But I'm like, do I want to distract myself? Like, is that going to help? Is that going to fix it?
Sure.
But also, like, is sitting in it going to also help? Because I don't think it will. Like, how much sitting in those emotions will fix it, right? Like,
Sure.
I have therapy tomorrow, so I'm definitely going to talk about it in therapy. But I don't know. I think that's so interesting. Like, being here in this moment and having this opportunity to be like, I have no clue what I need to do, but I'm going to keep trying things and I'm going to see what happens because like the only way is forward.
Sure.
So,
And I
yeah.
mean, I think that's a great perspective as someone who, after overcoming maladaptive daydreaming, what do you do with yourself? Well, that's the beauty of it. You can do whatever you want.
Right.
And you have that choice.
Yeah.
And not everybody can say that, but I mean, that wonderful feeling of once you do have a choice in your life, that's pretty awesome to have.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing too, is we're so used, like back to being in that bubble, is we're so used to doing the thing that I think it's very rare for us, even as humans, to be like, hold on a second. I can wake up tomorrow, choose a completely different life for the most part, right? Like, of course, there's always barriers, but I
Hmm.
can wake up tomorrow and choose to be a completely different person. I can show up a completely different way. I can
Yeah.
dress different. And I think people don't realize that we do have that power to do that. There's no one
Hmm.
stopping you. There might be someone who's like, what are you doing? Because they're used to the same thing. They're used to you showing up the way that you constantly do.
Sure.
And there is going to be that pushback of like, well, hold on. Who are you? What are you doing? What's happening? Right. But we do have
Yep.
that freedom. And that person, they might either need to take some time to get used to the new us, right? Whoever we want to actually show up as our authentic self.
Hmm.
Or that person might be someone who they were holding us back from doing what we authentically want to do, right? And I
Sure.
think part of healing from any type of mental health disorder is finding your authentic self and being like, this is actually what I want to do with my life, right?
Sure.
Mental health keeps us from doing those things, right? It keeps us in bed. It keeps us doing those bad habits that don't serve us. But
Sure.
then when we're like, I am going to show up as myself. And I think the people that like, they're going to show themselves about who is keeping you down from
Hmm.
being your best self.
Sure. And I mean, best case scenario, you do find someone who actually decides, hey, I like this version of you. I can actually see that in your eyes. I can actually build a better connection.
Right.
I want to get to know you more. And that makes me feel good.
Right.
So
And those are the people you want to keep around.
exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, that was another lovely discussion about maladaptive daydreaming. Once again, I'm Nicole Vetter. You can find me on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram.
Yep. And once again, I'm Glen San Juan. You can also find me on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. I think these conversations are great.
Oh, absolutely. This is like another therapy session for me.